All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name is Jay Nacklis. I'm one of the 3 associate consultants here at Coleman Insights. And I want to welcome you to our webinar presentation of the 3 T's of content execution, a second-by-second look at podcast listening behavior. Before we get started with today's webinar, just a couple notes. Number 1, all attendees are going to be muted so that we can keep things moving along. And number 2, if you do have questions, we ask that you go ahead and type them in and we'll answer them at the end if there's time. Otherwise, we'll make sure that we answer them for you offline. So let's get started. Let me introduce today's presenters from Coleman Insights, Senior Consultants Sam Milkman and John Boyne.
Thanks, Jay. This is John Boyne. I'll start things off here. We're really happy that you all have joined us for a little bit this afternoon. We have some really interesting research to share. As most of you probably know who are on the call, we're a research company that helps media companies build strong brands and develop great content. And so we present this with that goal in mind, to help you build great content by sharing what we've learned in some podcasting research so that you can apply it and think about how it applies to what you do. Now this is the result, this is a repeat of a presentation we gave at the Podcast Movement Conference in Philadelphia earlier this summer. But of course, not everyone was able to be there, so we wanted to share it more broadly with the industry today. And we call this a deep dive, a mediaEKG deep dive, because we're really trying to drill down and get in-depth listener feedback. I want to be clear, we're doing research with real consumers, real people, getting their real feedback on podcasts that they've heard, with the idea being, let's learn what works, let's learn what doesn't work. And while there's a lot that you can learn from research like this, we titled the project the 3 T's, and let me tell you what those are. So topic, treatment, and tone. Those are the 3 T's that you'll hear Sam and I talk a lot about today. But first, let's step back and give you a little background on these podcast research projects and how we got here.
In the podcast world, podcasters have access to some analytics, right? They see subscriber numbers, they see download counts. This feedback they're getting is getting more sophisticated, but really these numbers that you see as a podcasters don't really tell the story of what is going on with a particular podcast. Your numbers are going up, what does it mean? Your numbers are going down, what does that mean? Well, our clients come to us with lots of questions about why. Why are our subscriber numbers going down? Why are our download numbers going up? Does the audience like what they're hearing? Do they like these particular hosts? Do they like the topic choices that we're making? Do they like the particular tone or treatment that we're applying to the topic choices that we're making? These are the sort of questions that we're hearing time and again from our clients, and we're going to show you today how we answer some of those questions.
Now, oftentimes we can boil down success or problems into one of 2 major dimensions. The first dimension that you oftentimes hear us talking about is branding. Do you have a strong brand? Do you have a weak brand? A strong brand would mean that you're well known with your target audience. You're not only known, but they know all about you. They have accurate perceptions of you. They have positive perceptions of you. They have multi-layered deep perceptions of you. So that's branding, and that's how you're positioned in someone's mind. Obviously, if you have a strong brand, whether you're a podcast or a radio show or a TV show, you're in a better position to succeed. If you have a weak brand, that can lead to problems. The other major dimension that you oftentimes hear us talking about is content strength, in the moment execution. So think about that as in terms of what someone is hearing in that listening experience, right then and there, in the moment. Is it a great content experience? Is it a poor content experience? You may have a strong brand, but if you then underwhelm in the actual listening or viewing experience, you will underperform. Or maybe you have a mediocre brand, but great content execution can help raise the tide of your performance. And obviously, the place to be is in the upper right-hand quadrant, where you have both a strong brand in someone's mind and then great in-the-moment content and execution. Now, while branding is obviously important, what we're going to focus in on today primarily is content, is execution. And specifically, we're going to be looking at podcasts, of course, and helping you get a sense of some of the things that may work and not work from a content, in-the-moment experience position.
And to do that, we use a tool that we call the mediaEKG Deep Dive. And I want to explain to you as we get started here how exactly that tool works. For starters, we recruit a carefully targeted sample of people to listen to the podcast, and they're going to give us in-depth feedback on what they're hearing, what they like, what they don't like, why do they feel that way. And the way it actually works is these participants listen to the podcast and give us continuous feedback. And it's granular feedback, and it's on this survey platform that you're seeing on your screens now. And they're able to move their finger along the bottom to the right if they really like what they're hearing, all the way to the left if they dislike what they're hearing, and any place in between. And this is going to give us second-by-second feedback on their evaluation of the actual audio in the moment, second by second. And that output, that comes to us in a form that looks something like this. So along the left-hand side of your screen, vertically, you see numbers between 30 and 70. That's going to be the actual rating on average from the participants in our mediaEKG Deep Dive. Along the bottom, horizontally, you see time score, right? We're going to show this to you 30 seconds in, a minute and a half in, and so on and so forth. Actually, the feedback is second by second. It produces a graph that looks like this. And we call this the mediaEKG graph. You know, it kind of looks like what would be going on if they were testing your heart, right? And you see all the ups and downs of that EKG graph. So in our analysis, John and I are charged with, well, why did things go up so high at 2 minutes? Why did they come down at that minute mark? And we're going to understand how the audience is reacting to what they're hearing. We have another tool for doing that as well. Complementing that second-by-second feedback, we are also able to ask the audience particular questions. This complements that EKG graph. Why did you rate that particular segment highly? Why did you rate that particular segment poorly? What did you think of that host? We're able to ask a number of direct questions of the audience and collect their words as they react to each segment of the podcast. Now, for this specific project, we partnered with our friends at iHeartRadio. And we worked directly with Chris Peterson, the Senior Vice President of Podcasting at iHeart. And he told us, as we got started on this project, you know, the problem is there's not a lot of feedback in the podcast space. The analytics we get, he said, are, you know, kind of ridiculous. We don't know really what they mean. A download doesn't really tell you anything specifically at all. And we wanted to know, for the podcast that we're creating at iHeart, what's working and not working, so we can double down on what's working and do more of that, right? And then we asked him, hey, Chris, why do you want to let us share this with the industry, right? Why do you want everybody to know what's going on with your podcast? And he said, well, I hope it's going to say something good about my podcast. And at the same time, I want the industry to improve. I want the entire category to improve, not just us, but everybody as a whole can benefit from what we're talking about here. Now, the first podcast that Chris at iHeart had us evaluate is called the Ben and Ashley I Almost Famous Podcast. And I'm going to show you their logo on the screen, right? These are two folks who come from the Bachelorette universe, the very successful TV series on ABC. And the podcast itself is mainly about the Bachelor, Bachelorette universe.
And so in order to field the research project, we randomly recruited people with certain parameters. There's kind of a certain target audience for this particular podcast. Age, gender, everyone had to be viewers of the Bachelor or Bachelorette shows, since that's really the wheelhouse of this particular podcast. They had to be podcast listeners in general, but they didn't have to know the show. This wasn't a super fan recruit with their database. This is randomly recruited people who are within the target audience of this particular podcast. And again, as Sam said, as part of the survey experience, we played them real excerpts from the podcast and got their in-the-moment feedback. And we also asked questions of, why did you rate things the way you rated them? What did you like? What did you dislike? So we have this kind of marriage of quantitative and qualitative feedback on the podcast. Now, the big takeaway of all of the research that we did for the Ben and Ashley I Almost Famous podcast has to do with topic choice. Topic, that's one of the 3 T's. And that's the theme that really emerged in the research we did for this particular podcast. And if you think about it, all of the topic choices that are made could fall on a bullseye. And at the center of the bullseye is really the sweet spot. That is where you're talking about something that, generally speaking, is going to have high odds of success with your audience. That's why they're there. That's what they want to hear. That's what you're really good at. It's that bullseye topic lane that tends to work best. Now, for the Ben and Ashley I podcast, that bullseye topic lane is the Bachelor and Bachelorette universe. That's what this show is generally about. That's what makes these people memorable and unique to, generally speaking, to the audience. So when they're talking about Bachelor and Bachelorette universe stuff, their odds of success will tend to be higher, as we will show you. And if you want to really kind of narrow further than that, it's actually the current most recent season of the Bachelor or Bachelorette that's the real sweet spot of the bullseye target lane. In this particular case, these podcasts that we assessed were being done around the season with Bachelor Ari. And Sam, why don't you give us just a little bit of color commentary on what's happening here, because it'll help frame the research that we're about to share.
Yeah, to really understand what's going on in this research, you have to have some appreciation for this very exciting last season of The Bachelor, where Ari, the race car driver, as a bachelor, caused a little bit of controversy, because in the end, he narrowed his options, his choices down to 2 women, right? Becca on his left and Lauren on his right. And in the season finale, he proposed to Becca. He chose Becca. But unfortunately, he had some second thoughts. And in that same show, we saw Ari break Becca's heart and break up with her. And all this is unfolding right in front of our eyes on camera. And ultimately, Ari breaks up with Becca and proposes to Lauren, the runner-up. So you need to understand that to appreciate really what Ari is up to and what is going on in this season, and ultimately in this mediaEKG deep dive that we're about to show you.
A lot of controversy.
Yes, a lot of controversy, and it leaves Ari somewhat loved and somewhat hated for what he did to these 2 women. Okay, so I'm going to show you the mediaEKG material now, the feedback that we got graphically from the audience. And again, I want to remind you of what this graph that you see on your screen is showing you. Down the left-hand side of the screen, vertically, those numbers are going to be the average evaluation scores that we're getting back from the audience. And along the bottom is the time. So as things move out to the right, that's time moving on in the podcast segment itself. And with that in mind, the first segment that I want to show you is the Bachelor season finale. Okay, and in this segment, the show Ben and Ashley are going to talk about that season finale and what had just happened with Ari. They've assembled a roundtable discussion. Some former cast members are going to join them, and they're going to talk about what has just happened in this finale.
So let's look at how this particular segment from the podcast performed in the mediaEKG research. This is a very strong performance. Now everything starts at 50, that's kind of the kickoff point, but notice how quickly it rises, which tends to indicate a strong setup and introduction. The interest level immediately pops and then steadily grows to a very high level. You notice there aren't big swings, there aren't big dips. This was a strong segment, and it has a few fundamental things working in its favor. So first of all, well, it's about The Bachelor. That's that sweet spot in terms of topic choice. Topic, the first T. This is in the bullseye topic lane. Moreover, it's timely. It's not just talking about The Bachelor. It's talking about the hot season finale coming right off on the heels of it. Third thing that this segment had going for it, there was controversy to talk about. People were buzzing about it. This was a water cooler type of experience. And fourth, this segment benefited from inside information. As Sam said, it was Ben and Ashley talking, who themselves are kind of insiders, having done the show, but also it was a panel of people who were actually from this season with Ari, who were there in the house. So you had really good, juicy insider information as well. So all these things work together to create a really strong segment. So we see this quantitatively in the mediaEKG evaluation, but we also get a lot of qualitative feedback. Let's just walk through a sampling of that feedback.
Right. In the words of the audience, I like how they went in depth with a certain hot topic about the show.
I like the behind-the-scenes story.
Yeah. And this is exactly what I would expect from this podcast. We were right in the center of the bullseye when we were having this conversation. So I'd like to show you another segment. This next one is a segment we call the Former Bachelorette, right? That's just our name for it as we analyzed it. And this is about a conversation with a former Bachelorette, Rachel Lindsay, who, I mean, I know you watch the show, John, but some people on the call may not have. She was the centerpiece of last year's 13th season of The Bachelorette. And here on this segment, they are going to talk about the show, particularly what it's like to be the Bachelor or the Bachelorette and having to pass the torch at some point in the show. And then Rachel transitions into what she's up to today in life, and she's become a sports lawyer and wants to talk about sports, which may or may not be quite as interesting to the audience as you'll see.
So let's take a look at how this segment with the former Bachelorette, Rachel Lindsay, does. It does very well. Now, it's not as strong as the first segment, which again had a lot of things going for it, but it's in that Bachelor-Bachelorette universe, so that makes it relevant. Not necessarily as current and timely, and therefore that makes it a little less relevant, but it still does very well. Now, you may notice toward the end, it doesn't completely fall apart, but the interest level does settle. And that is precisely the period of time where Rachel transitions from talking about her Bachelor and Bachelorette experience to talking about her life now doing sports law. And so that particular portion of this segment was not quite as compelling to the audience. So here's some feedback that we got. Again, just a sampling.
I love Rachel, and I love hearing her opinion on the new season of The Bachelorette.
I like the info about how she and Ben each dealt with passing the torch once they were done being the Bachelor or the Bachelorette.
Mm-hmm. I liked hearing what Rachel was doing, but sports talk was just boring. You can't please everybody all the time, right? That's what we've learned. Let's talk about a third segment that we analyzed from Ben and Ashley. And this one is about a segment called Who the Heck Are You? Who the heck are you? Now, that was a clever name for this feature. And Ben and Ashley chose that name for this segment because they knew from time to time they were going to have guests on the podcast who were not central figures, not well-known bachelor or bachelorettes, or people who have been on the show, right? They were going to have to take some guests like that. And so to make it compelling content, they said, why don't we call it Who the Heck Are You? And recognize that this may not be a well-known person, but we're going to have to work extra hard to make this entertaining. And in this case, they had a guest on named Kelly Travis. And she was a contestant in season 18 of The Bachelor. You know, John, the one with Juan Pablo.
Right. Sure.
Juan Pablo. And you might remember her as the contestant who brought her dog on the show. People, remember that they loved the dog on the show. But generally speaking, Kelly Travis is not a very memorable character. But look at what happens when the show brings her on in Who the Heck Are You?
Yeah, so the Who the Heck Are You segment actually does very well. Again, not at the tip top of performance, but it is in the Bachelor wheelhouse. There's good execution of it. And it's not the most timely, it's not the biggest name, but it's of interest to this audience. It's still in that Bachelor-Bachelorette universe. So again, here's a little sampling of the feedback that we got on Who the Heck Are You?
I like hearing updates about previous Bachelor and Bachelorette contestants.
I like hearing about how she was able to bring her dog on her season.
Juan Pablo's season was awful. No one remembers who this girl is.
So the good and the bad.
The good and the bad, right? Why don't we share another segment with you now? The show can't always talk about the Bachelor or Bachelorette every single moment. And in this next segment, the two hosts wanted to talk about a movie that they were very, very passionate about individually. Am I on the right one? No, I'm not. I'm sorry. I apologize. We'll get to that one in a moment, right? I apologize. This next segment is actually called Bachelor of the Masters. I apologize for doing that. And this is a tale of two segments, really. This particular segment has a bit of a split personality, right? It's going to start with a conversation about the Bachelor breakups. This particular season was known as the season of an uncoupling, and there's a lot of that going on, a lot of breakups going on. There's also talk at that moment about an upcoming multiple Bachelor wedding that was being planned. But somewhere along the way in this conversation, Ben takes a hard left turn, and he starts talking about his weekend at the Masters golf tournament with his dad. And so we're going to see what happens when he begins to talk that way.
So here's the result of the mediaEKG research. And again, as Sam said, it's really the tale of two segments here. This in the box is exactly where Ben starts talking about his weekend at the Masters, which, he was obviously very passionate about. It was an interesting story, but notice how it sinks in interest level. So what is going on there? Let's go to the audience and just give you a little sample of the feedback that we heard.
It was good at the start.
It got very boring at the midway point. Something happened there.
The energy in the beginning sounded promising.
But I almost took a cat nap at the end.
The beginning sounded like a podcast that I was going to be interested in.
Then Ben started talking about golf.
I like that they talked about Bachelor breakups and weddings.
But I didn't like how long he talked about the Masters. So again, you can't win them all. Sometimes you do have to get outside your wheelhouse. And in this particular case, it's just evidence how the moving outside of that core bullseye topic lane can be high risk and can have less than stellar results with your audience.
All right, now let me get to the Greatest Showman segment. Like I said, there are, from time to time, any podcast is going to have to find something to talk about beyond its core, beyond its target, beyond the center of that bullseye. They're going to want to talk about things that don't live in that absolute center of the universe. And you can see that from time to time they're going to struggle when they do that, when they take something that is outside the center of the audience's interest and make that their topic. But both hosts, Ben and Ashley, are passionate consumers of The Greatest Showman movie. They love this movie, and they wanted to talk about it. So we're going to see what happens when they did.
So again, this is outside the bullseye topic lane. You'll notice it starts and kind of stays at a level that's lower than the other segments. It just wasn't The Bachelor, it wasn't The Bachelorette. So it didn't pique the audience's interest. It wasn't as consistent with why they tune in as much as some of the other segments. But watch what happens from the midpoint on. Look at that pattern. The segment doesn't keep sinking. In fact, it kind of settles and then gradually starts to work its way up. They turned the audience for this segment. This was a segment that they were really passionate about. And I'd say it overperformed, it punched above its weight, it clawed its way up in interest at the end, despite not being in the bullseye topic lane. So a couple of points of feedback we got about this.
I like hearing Ashley be so passionate about The Greatest Showman.
But I dislike that there was no mention of Bachelor news, since that is the topic of the podcast. Right. So, this is just a sampling of the research that we've done for the Ben and Ashley podcast, but we hope it illustrates these points related to the topic lane, the bullseye topic lane. And for this particular show, we've seen how the sweet spot, the bullseye, is the current most timely season of the show. In this case, it was Bachelor Ari, the race car driver. What's happening with that particular show? When you're talking about that, when Ben and Ashley are talking about the current season and its controversies, it doesn't mean that they'll always be knocking it out of the park, but it means their odds of success are probably going to be higher. A little outside of that bullseye topic lane, but still in the Bachelor universe, came these extensions. Rachel Lindsay, the former Bachelorette, and then Who the Heck Are You? A good way to extend the universe, even with people who are not as well known. And then look, sometimes you go outside the target lane completely. You're talking about your personal life, your weekend at the Masters with your dad. You're talking about a movie that you're passionate about, and your odds of success are probably lower for these types of segments. Doesn't mean they can't do well. Remember, we saw the Greatest Showman segment really pick up at the end, but the audience is probably going to be less receptive to that. And so for those kind of segments, you really want to make sure you're on your A game.
We looked at one additional segment. We looked at an endorsement that was embedded in the middle of the podcast. Ben and Ashley endorsed a product called the FabFit Fun Box, which is a monthly subscription box that comes to people with women's cosmetics inside and some novelty items. And Ben and Ashley took a tone with this that was fun and humorous, with a lot of sexual innuendo that I won't repeat and some double entendre.
And so let's look at how this endorsement segment, this commercial segment, worked from a mediaEKG standpoint. Now, it's not a out of the park home run. It peaks, but then when people realize that it's a commercial, their interest level goes down. No surprise there. But if you kind of take a glass as half full approach to analyzing this, it could be a lot worse. I mean, it's actually pretty good for an endorsement. It sits in the middle of the interest zone there, and we think this has a lot to do with the humorous tone of the segment. Tone is one of the three T's we're talking about today. And so here's some of the feedback that we heard about this.
The product piece was a bit long, but they both sounded fun and engaging, so I would listen.
It made me laugh out loud. I liked the guy talking about the beauty box.
I like discovering new products and getting all the details about it in a funny manner.
All right, let's pivot to the second podcast that we studied.
So iHeartRadio also trusted us with analyzing a brand new podcast by the name of Business Unusual with Barbara Corcoran. Barbara, you know her most likely from the ABC TV show Shark Tank, but she was a guest on the Elvis Duran show and after that appearance on the show, she expressed some interest in doing a podcast, despite never having listened to one herself, admittedly. She wanted to do something different. She wanted to do something original. They came up with an idea for a short-form, unusual business advice podcast in a quick 7-minute format. It was a new podcast. iHeart didn't know how people would respond to it. Should they change this format away from the 7-minute design? Should they go longer? Should she have interviews with other business people on the show? They just didn't know, and those why questions were to be answered by our mediaEKG deep dive. Now, again, you see on the screen that same graphical expression that you're going to see with the numbers along the left-hand side showing you the evaluation scores, and along the bottom, horizontally, you're seeing the time as it goes on during each of these segments. And the first one that we're going to show you is a segment called How to Ask Your Boss for a Raise. And Barbara is going to talk about this very popular topic. You know, most people would like to make more money than they're making right now. Most people would like to be able to ask their boss for a raise. And Barbara lays it out very specifically. You know, she gives you bullet points on how to address this request, right? Make an appointment with your boss. Dress the part, a little nicer that day so that your boss takes you seriously. Prepare your case. Even prepare a presentation for your boss to show him, you know, him or her what you accomplished this year, making you worthy for this raise. She gives you all those details in this segment.
So let's look at how it performed. This was a strong segment. Notice it quickly pops up and then just gradually climbs from there and never really declines. You know, this segment was more than 4 minutes long, and it kept, you know, either plateauing or getting a little bit stronger in terms of holding the audience's interest. And it had a couple of fundamental things going for it. First, as Sam said, it's a compelling topic. I'm sure a lot of people are interested in the best way to ask their boss for a raise. That's topic choice. We covered a lot of that when we talked about Ben and Ashley's podcast. But also important with this one was its compelling treatment. Treatment is the third of the 3 T's. We talked about topic, we talked about tone. Let's talk about treatment. Treatment is what you do with the topic, how you want to deliver it. In this case, she went through in a very structured, specific, point-by-point process of laying out the case for how to ask your boss for a raise. And it was really compelling to the audience. So here's a couple of examples of the feedback that we heard.
In the words of the audience, her advice on asking for a raise was clear, specific, and structured. This person got it exactly.
I liked that there were specific steps to prepare for asking for a raise, which made it less daunting. So that specific, structured, point-by-point treatment worked very well. Let's look at another one.
Yeah, how about if we show you another segment from Barbara Corcoran, and this one, we probably should have reviewed it before this afternoon and listened to it again, but how to become a better public speaker, right? How to become a better, we all can get better at this, right? But Barbara admits, which makes her kind of lovable, is that she bombed once when she went out on a public speaking engagement really early on in her career. And she said, you know, having that horrible experience could lead one to run from those experiences and never take a public speaking engagement ever again, or you could do what Barbara did, which is become a student on how to speak in public, how to get better at doing this. And she's, again, going to give very good specifics on how to get that done. Know your topic. Know what you're going to say. Know who your audience is. She's going to list all that for you, and let's see how that goes.
So this is another segment that does very well, almost as well as the first segment that I showed you. I do want to point out around the 2-minute mark, notice that there's this bump off in interest. And something did happen right there. What happened was Barbara begins a list of numbered tips. Number 1, do this. Number 2, do that. Number 3, do this. We oftentimes find that audiences react favorably to lists. You see it in David Letterman's top 10. Here you're seeing it for Barbara. That's the type of treatment She could have just talked about things in generally, but she kind of enumerated them through tips, and it does pique the audience's interest there.
Now, that was her particular treatment of that topic, right? Of that topic of public speaking. And Barbara had two major types of treatments in the segments that we analyzed. The first was a monologue. It was Barbara alone speaking directly about a topic that she thought the audience would find very interesting. The second type of treatment that Barbara used was a Q&A.
So it looks like we just lost John and Sam's audio. We're going to take a quick look at that and see if we can get them back on. So hold on one moment, and thank you for your patience.
Okay, so we understand that we lost audio there for a moment. We'll pick up right where we were. We had two different types of treatments inside of the Business Unusual podcast. The first was a monologue from Barbara outlining her thoughts on a particular topic. And the second type of treatment that Barbara employed was a Q&A period. And we want to understand whether one treatment type did better than the other on average. So we averaged the mediaEKG scores for those main topic segments that we analyzed. And I'm showing you on the screen that they had an average evaluation of 70%. Okay, well, how did the Q&A segments do? 71% on average. And the conclusion there is that these two treatments are both effective for Barbara. Indeed, one is no better than the other. They both work nicely. Our hope for Barbara over time is that she deploys some additional treatments, and we'll see how those go as we continue to study Barbara on down the line.
So while there are a lot of things that we can learn from content research, big things, little things, again, we want to boil this down for you. And so we're focusing on those three major themes, the three T's. So first, let's review topic choice. Topic choice is incredibly important. You want to know your bullseye topic lane. You want to know what topics are most likely to bring success for you. What are you an expert in? What are you knowledgeable about? What are you passionate about? Why do people come to your podcast? When you're talking about your bullseye topic lane, it may not always work, but the odds of success are higher. This is what we saw with Ben and Ashley's podcast. And then you have to consider how can you extend outside of the bullseye topic lane in a way that still works very well. Remember, they did that with the Who the Heck Are You segment. And then we also understand that, there are times where you're even well outside your bullseye topic lane. And that's okay. Just understand your odds of success at those times are probably lower. And so while your particular podcast or show may not be about The Bachelor, you'll have your own topic lane, whether it's antique cars or fashion or the Philadelphia Eagles.
The second T is treatment. You saw this in Barbara. You can choose different means of addressing your topic, and some of these will be effective for you, and some of these will not be as effective for you. You want to know which ones work for you and which ones don't, and mix it up a bit to make it interesting for the audience. So you might choose, like Barbara did, to do a monologue, you alone speaking about the topic. Or you could have a dialogue, you and somebody else, a team member interacting, or bring in some more people, make it a roundtable discussion. You could interview a guest. And so it's you asking questions and them answering, or Q&A from the audience. That was another device that Barbara used in her treatment. Some other ideas, okay, you can take listener calls, text, or emails in your podcast. You could use lists like Barbara did. And another idea would be recurring benchmarks like you saw with Ben and Ashley and the Who the Heck Are You benchmark.
So the third T is tone. You can cover the exact same topic using different tones, and the outcome can be very different depending on that choice. So, for example, let's take whatever the latest President Trump news is. It's a political story. Your tone could be humorous, like a Stephen Colbert. Your tone on that same story could be more serious, almost professorial, like Fareed Zakaria. Or you could take a tone that's an angry rant. Same topic, but different tones lead to very different results. And obviously the takeaway here is not that there's any one size fits all with topic, treatment, or tone, but you'll have to understand for your show or the shows you work with, what are those ideal topics? What is that ideal treatment? Is the ideal tone in order to optimize your performance?
And the big thing that we want to leave you with is, no matter what you do, get feedback from your audience. Get feedback from your audience, whether you're doing a podcast or whether you're doing a radio show. Understand from them what they like and what they don't like. What's working and what isn't working from the perspective of the audience. You can do that formally with a company like ours, or you can do it informally by putting together a group of users and just sitting and talking to them one-on-one. But whatever you do, get some feedback, and let's all learn together and improve what we're doing in podcasting and audio entertainment in general.
So we're almost to the end here. I'm just going to review the questions to see if there's anything we can quickly answer. And if we don't get to your question, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can email info@colemaninsights.com. One of the questions I see here is, are these people listening all the way through? Yes. This is a case where, just like in music research or other kind of researches, we want them all to have a common experience. So, if someone listens halfway or if someone participates just a portion of the survey, we don't count them. We want everyone to have the common experience, the highs, the lows. So another question is, does this podcast research apply to kind of more traditional radio shows?
And the answer is absolutely. We use the same tool on radio shows, but you can think about how the principles that you saw on the screen this afternoon have application to a radio show, and there's a lot more to be learned with tools like this on how to improve any form of audio, even video entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fundamentals that we have showed you today are not new. They go way back. They go back to the days of Aristotle, dramaturgy. These are fundamentals that I think just exist with humans in entertainment. And so the 3 T's are simply present here in podcasting, just as they would be on the radio or on television. So again, we want to be respectful of your time. We really appreciate you joining us. If you have any questions, please reach out to Coleman Insights, reach out to Sam, reach out to me. You can email our company at info@colemaninsights.com. Thank you very much.
I like your tone, John.